if one is seeking to improve in any aspect of skill, but with this being a writing channel, I'm obviously going to tie this into writing. You need to understand that skill comes from having a good feedback mechanism and being able to analyze from that and make adjustments. I've spoken before on this, the idea of having things like critique groups, of being able to look at rejections from, basically from agents, editors, and being able to kind of ascertain why they might have rejected you and fixing that. I've spoken about, reading other people's works and seeing, why their work it might be better than yours, or why their work seems to convey the sort of emotion or story that yours doesn't seem to. All that's been spoken about before, and it's important to have that feedback mechanism and to develop that skill of being able to do that. But it's also important to recognize the area of self-bias when it comes to this. Especially in the writing process, there's a lot of self-bias. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of misrepresentation at times. I think one of the very first videos I ever made on this channel, all the way back almost a year ago now, was titled, I think, "Your Mind is a Liar," or something like that, or "The Writer's Mind's a Deceptive Mind," or something. I can't remember the exact title. But it was basically about some advice I had gotten from my professors through my MFA. And it's very, very true. Now, in the context of writing, what that often means is not just sort of tricking yourself into thinking that your work's really good when it's not, or I guess the opposite of sort of beating yourself up basically on some work that is like 95% great and 5% needs fixing, and you think the whole thing sucks and throwing it out. That's the other thing too. That's another element of misrepresentation, of sort of self-bias there. But you also need to be aware of it when it comes to the broader aspects of your projects. And I'm starting to realize that now with myself. What kind of spurred this idea was the notion that this project is done, that I'm sort of tired of working on this project, that I am ready to end it. I've sort of stretched this thing as far as I can stretch it. I've learned as much as I can learn from this project, and now it's time to wrap it up and move on to the next one. That feels true. That has felt true, but there's always a chance that it's a misunderstanding, that I'm sort of misrepresenting it, that while, yeah, it feels that way, maybe it could not necessarily be accurate. And a good example of why that might be inaccurate, and one of the things I'm tending to find is, if you're someone that, just as an example for myself here, is affected a lot by the seasons, like when seasonal change happens, that's going to inform your psyche of your story. And that's tends to be what I found right now with my book. I was sort of going through this today, and I kind of realized, well, yeah, maybe this project's done. Maybe I am done with this thing. Maybe there's nothing more to gain from it. But at the same time, it kind of occurred to me, well, you're saying that, but it's also fall. And for those that maybe are listening to this that may not make that correlation, if you're someone that tends to be very in tune with the weather, who tends to, who claims that their emotions are affected by the season and all that stuff, that's going to affect other areas. And so I started thinking, hey, maybe this feeling of my story being done, maybe it's just because it's the fall and everything's, outside, everything's dying and it's getting cold, and you're tired, just from seasonally, when it gets colder out, you're obviously more tired. And maybe the lack of sunlight that's coming in now, in the upper hemisphere here, maybe that's affecting your mood in a way that's making you perhaps not, like, I wouldn't say, necessarily depressed basically, but it's affecting your mood to the point where you're getting an attitude of, all right, let's just end this. I'm tired. I want to wrap this up, right? You're getting sort of that sort of fall mentality, right? The harvest, the reaping season, to be very, very broad in that sort of emotion. Maybe that's seeping in. Perhaps this project really has a lot more left for me to learn from it, and I'm just taking basically, the general emotions of the season into account and misrepresenting that and interpreting that as my project is done. It's not the easiest thing to figure out, and I still feel pretty certain that this project needs to end, that I really haven't gotten anything else to explore with the project. But it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting consideration. And I don't think many people would correlate that. I don't think there's many people basically that would, when it comes time to end a project, or they're feeling like a project needs to be done, and they sort of go through the mental checklist of, okay, so this isn't shiny new idea syndrome. I'm not just bored. I'm not just stuck on a really difficult part in my story that I don't know how to fix or edit, and I just want to take the easy way out and just not do it anymore. I don't think on that checklist of analysis, of reconsideration for your project, you put down, maybe I'm just going through a personal slump. Maybe it's just the weather. Maybe the weather's getting to me. Maybe like in a week or two, my disposition will change and I'll feel different about this story. I don't think most people would consider that. I really don't. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Writing comes from within us. Writing comes from our psyche. And the things that affect our psyche, even the subtlest of things, and it's not just the weather, it's your job, your relationships, your everything that's going on in your life, your stressors, things that make you happy, that affects your writing. That affects your want to write. That affects the content that you write, which is why I always hammer in the idea of, having your personal life satisfied. The idea of, if you want to have a good creative life, you have to have a very stable personal life. You can't live this sort of rock and roll kind of wild child lifestyle, that might have once been glamorized but is now kind of an old hat. You can't do that and I think produce really great content. Or at least not for most people, I think. There obviously there are exceptions, that people will point out the exceptions to the rule here, but I think in general, having stability tends to lend itself to better creativity because your psyche is informed, or your psyche informs your work. And so keep that in mind. Keep the idea of self-bias in mind here in all its aspects, not just the aspect of simply, self-bias in terms of your writing and how you evaluate the small things of your project, but just your attitude towards the writing process overall. If you find yourself maybe in my situation as well, where, you're trying to write every single day, maybe this time of year, maybe you feel less motivated. Maybe you just have, lack the desire and motivation. Perhaps it's something beyond the project. Perhaps it is something outside of what you're doing that's affecting it. Maybe it's something else that's going on in your life or something part of the greater environment. Keep that in mind. I realize it sounds kind of hippie, kind of hippie-ish. Again, if you listen to this channel for any length of time, you'll know I tend to have, at times sort of these hippie kind of positions. I tend to take these sort of kind of well-rounded sort of positions on these things just because, I tend to view things as a bit more interconnected than maybe other people tend to view it. I don't tend to compartmentalize this process as much as other people's might. So something to be aware of. As far as an update on the project goes, I just, as you see here, I made some more corrections today. These were actually the most corrections that I have made as of late. This was a kind of a heavy correction level day. I'm going to have to go through and make another pass on this section. The reason for that is that I'm at the point now where I'm on the newly revised part, right? That new ending. Excuse me. The new ending that I wrote, that new section that I had penned. This is the part where I'm on now. So really I'm going through just a second draft version of this particular part. So I was going through making very heavy corrections today, just for that reason. The part that you do the newest and the freshest section needs to be corrected the most. With that too, I will say there was an element of inspiration to it. There was an element of kind of new fire and vigor, in the process. So, again, maybe my disposition towards this whole thing is simply that. It's simply just me approaching the writing process with a new attitude because I can actually make some really good corrections on this part. I can actually make something of a difference in these sections as opposed to the other ones, which were more polished and it's less exciting. The less polished your work is, the more you're like, all right, I just have to kind of go through because it's a formality rather than because you get really jazzed up because there's a whole section you can rewrite and re-explore and kind of make huge improvements. It's less inspiring when you do that. So that'll be me for the next few days, just going through making these corrections. Again, at some point, I'll make a video about what I'm going to do next as far as what the process is going to be as far as querying going forward. But yeah, we're getting close to the end. I still feel it despite that, despite this recontextualization, despite what I've spoken about earlier about kind of the season and things affecting me. It's time. I'm still feel like it's time to wrap this thing up and get it out. So sooner rather than later, I anticipate the story will be going out. Certainly not yet, and especially with this section I worked on, it's going to take a little bit of time. But yeah, sooner rather than later, this thing is going out.